No one in the kingdom ever imagined that a queen sitting on her throne, surrounded by robes, gold, jewels, and accolades, could ever descend into the dusty streets of a commoner. Yet, as age had turned her hair grey and years of reign had given her the wisdom to see through people's hearts, she understood that power could not buy sincerity, and what worried her most was not the throne, but the future of her only son. Her prince was gentle and upright, but precisely because of this, she feared he would choose a woman who loved the crown more than the man behind it. At lavish parties, she had seen too many eyes light up, not because of the prince, but because of power and wealth. Her motherly heart would not allow that to happen, so the queen made an unexpected decision. She disguised herself as a scavenger, donned worn-out clothes, and ventured into impoverished neighborhoods where there was no flattery, no gold or silver, only people in their true nature. There, she quietly observed who would stoop to help the weak, who would turn a blind eye, and who would be willing to give kindness without expecting anything in return. Her purpose wasn't to test the disparity between rich and poor, but to find a good wife for her son, a woman with a pure heart, who knew how to love, sacrifice, and respect human values more than social status. She believed that true character was most clearly revealed in poverty. But then, during that seemingly quiet journey, something unexpected happened. A small moment, a simple act, changed all of the queen's plans and sealed the fate of the entire royal family forever. Queen Helen sat by the large window of her palace, silently gazing down at the vast grounds below. That early morning, the gentle sunlight spread everywhere. Guards patrolled, servants swept the courtyard, and birds soared against the deep blue sky. Everything was normal, perfect, like a precious painting, yet her heart could not find peace. Queen Helen's worries revolved around her only son, Prince Daniel. He had reached marriageable age, a handsome, kind, and gentle man. Countless girls desired to be his wife, wealthy young ladies, proud young women, those who loved the crown and title more than the man who wore it. The queen had watched them for years. She saw how some of the girls smiled radiantly at the sight of Daniel's car. She saw their eyes instantly change, shining with greed, as they entered the palace and saw the gold, marble, and gleaming floors. Their love, she knew, was not genuine, deep. Their hearts were not warm. She recalled her late husband, the king she loved. He had been a poor teacher before God elevated him to a high position. She had loved him when he had nothing. More than anyone else, she understood the meaning of loving a man for who he was, not for the crown on his head. Before he died, the king held her hand, his dying words echoing in her ears every day. Please, give Daniel a wife with a pure heart. Not a girl who loves titles, but a girl who knows how to love people. Those words became a sacred promise and the greatest burden on her. Sometimes, she would wake up in the middle of the night hearing them again. Prince Daniel loves his mother and is ready to marry. But every time the queen introduces a potential bride, he sits silently and then says, "Mother, I feel like something is missing. I don't feel at peace." Queen Helen understood that feeling. She saw the same thing. Many girls were beautiful on the outside, but had cold hearts. They despised the poor, mocked servants, and craved attention. Daniel needed more than that. He needed a life partner, a queen who was loving and compassionate. One evening, as the sun set and the sky painted a brilliant orange, Queen Helen strolled alone through the royal gardens. Her evening gown glided across the grass. Her tiara felt heavy, but her heart was even heavier. "Oh God," she whispered, "I am a queen, but I am also a mother. Please show me my daughter-in-law. Please show me a girl who will love my son, not his throne. A girl who will love people, not money." A gentle breeze blew across her face. A strange, simple, yet powerful thought suddenly entered her mind. If you want to find a true heart, go to a place where hearts are tested. The queen's eyes slowly opened. She looked down at her delicate hands, at her exquisite robe, and then towards the distant palace gates. Everyone treated her with utmost respect because she was the queen. They knelt, bowed their heads, and smiled. No one dared reveal their true nature in her presence. No one dared insult the weak while the queen was watching. But what if she wasn't the queen in their eyes? What if she looked like a poor, dirty person? Someone nobody respected. Slowly, a bold and unusual idea formed in her mind. It was a risky, extraordinary idea, and certainly not something a queen should do, but it gave her a sense of righteousness. It seemed to be the only way to see into the true hearts of men. That night, Queen Helen sat before her dressing table and removed her crown. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. Without the crown, she looked older, smaller, almost like an ordinary woman. She touched her face and whispered, "If I must lose my regal appearance to find a truly worthy Dvar-in-law, I will." This was the beginning of a plan that would change many destinies, including that of a girl named Grace, who at that moment was weeping silently in a small, luxurious house far from the palace, treated like a slave by her stepmother. The next morning, Queen Helen awoke before the palace roosters crowed. The sky was still grey, the servants hadn't yet come out, and the guards at the gate yawned sleepily. She opened her wardrobe and looked at her magnificent dresses. None of them suited the plan. They were too beautiful, too clean, too regal. She went to an old chest in the corner of the room, where clothes from years ago were stored, put away and almost forgotten. She searched until she found a faded dress and a loose-fitting blouse. Their colors were pale, the fabric rough. She held them in her hands for a long time, breathing slowly. Then she took off her silk nightgown and put on the old clothes. She used a tattered scarf to wrap her hair. She looked in the mirror. The woman in the mirror was no longer the queen. Her clothes were wrinkled, her headscarf coarse, her face unadorned. She looked like any poor, weary woman on the streets. To complete her disguise, she took a small bag and stuffed it with plastic bags and old gloves. She picked up a long stick from the garden, the kind used for hauling garbage. As she stepped out of the room, her heart raced. She felt as if she were doing something wrong, even though she was certain her reasoning was sound. In the hallway, an elderly maid saw her and nearly screamed, "Your Majesty, what are you wearing?" Queen Helen smiled gently. "Today I am not queen," she said softly. "Today, I am just an ordinary woman." The maid didn't understand, but the queen's gaze was calm and serious. "Don't tell anyone," Queen Helen added. "If anyone asks, say I went to visit the convent." The maid bowed her head, both embarrassed and obedient. At the back gate of the palace, Queen Helen quietly stepped out. The guard there, not looking closely, mistook her for one of the elderly servants and did not question her. The streets outside the palace are waking up. Vendors push their wheelbarrows. Children in tattered uniforms hurry to school. Women sweep in front of small houses, pushing away dust and rubbish. The air is tinged with the smell of smoke from early morning cooking fires. Queen Helen walked slowly along the path, carrying her bag. For the first time in years, her feet touched the dust. People passed her without greeting. No one bowed, no one smiled with special respect. In one yard, a woman sweeping looked at her with disgust. "That old hag doing dirty work," she muttered aloud, "always lurking around rubbish." Those words stunned the queen slightly, but she continued walking. She reminded herself of her reason for doing this. She wanted to see the true hearts of people. She wanted to see how they treated someone they thought was insignificant. She walked to the edge of the market. There, garbage was piled up in small heaps, rotting food, broken plastic, old newspapers. Flies swarmed everywhere. People had to cover their noses as they walked past. Queen Helen began her work. She bent down, picked up cans and bottles, and put them in a bag. Some people stared and shook their heads. A group of young girls walked past, laughing loudly. Their hair was neatly combed, their clothes tidy. One of them pointed at the queen and said, "Look how dirty she is. Imagine her smelling like that all day." Another added, "Maybe her children abandoned her. Who would want a mother like that?" They laughed again and walked away. Those words cut deep into the queen's heart, not because they were true, but because they were so insensitive. But Queen Helen swallowed her pain. If these were well-dressed girls coming to the palace, she knew they could never become Daniel's wives. She continued walking from street to street, from corner to corner, observing and listening, silently waiting for a different kind of heart, a kind voice, a gentle hand. She didn't know that, ahead, beyond the market, in a small building with cracked walls and a rusty gate, a girl named Grace was sweeping, her thin body bent with exhaustion and fear. After completing her bizarre transformation from a powerful queen to a filthy scavenger, Helen stood silently at the back gate of the palace, the plastic bag of tools clinging to her hands, accustomed to handling jewels. Stepping out of that gate was not just stepping out of the palace, but into a world she had been isolated from for too long, the world of raw truth and unforgiving judgment. Outside, the streets of Ravona were stirring. Vendors pushed their rusty wheelbarrows, their wheels creaking loudly. Children in worn-out uniforms hurried to school, avoiding the piles of rubbish left over from the night before. The morning air was no longer as fresh as in the palace, but heavy with the smell of coal smoke, road dust, and the dampness of garbage. Queen Helen walked slowly along the road, her long cane scraping lightly against the ground. For the first time in years, her feet felt the roughness of the dust. She walked among the crowd, bearing the appearance of someone scorned by society. The first striking thing was her invisibility. People passed her without a greeting, no respectful glances, no bows, no polite smiles. She was just an obstacle, a part of the street scene that people wanted to avoid. On a street corner, a middle-aged woman sweeping her yard saw her. Instead of bowing, she looked at the Queen with obvious disgust. "Look at that old woman doing that filthy work," the woman muttered loudly, loud enough for the Queen to hear. "Always surrounded by rubbish. Filthy, the whole neighborhood." Those words struck her like a blow. Queen Helen, who had never heard such an insult in her entire reign, felt somewhat stunned. She swallowed her pain and reminded herself why she was doing this. This was the truth she needed to witness. This was how the world treated those they thought were nothing. She continued walking toward the edge of the market where even larger piles of garbage lay. The stench of rotting food, broken plastic, and dirty paper was overwhelming. Passers-by covered their noses and hurried past. Queen Helen began her work. She bent down, using a stick, to pick the cans and plastic bottles out of the filthy pile of rubbish. She put them into plastic bags. Her back ached, her hands were covered in dirt and waste. But she continued, her eyes constantly observing. A group of young girls walked by, dressed in fine clothes, their hair neatly styled. They laughed loudly, their laughter echoing in the air. When they saw the Queen hunched over in the pile of rubbish, one girl pointed and giggled. "Look how filthy she is. Just imagining the smell is disgusting," she said. Another girl added a more cruel remark. "Maybe her children abandoned her. Who would want a mother like that?" They laughed loudly and walked away, their words heartless and sharp as a knife. These insults cut deeper than the previous ones, because they targeted her most sacred role, that of a mother. However, this very cruelty strengthened Queen Helen's resolve. She swallowed her pain, acutely aware of the callousness of the opulent world. If these were the well-dressed girls who frequented the palace and vied for Daniel's attention, she knew for certain that none of them could ever become her son's wife. They might possess outward beauty, but their hearts were cold and full of contempt. She continued her work, going from street corner to street corner, listening to the gossip, the mocking laughter, and the shouting. She was searching for a glimmer of light, the smallest sign of kindness, a gentle voice, a compassionate hand. She waited patiently, believing that, amidst this dust and cruelty, the pure heart her husband had longed for surely existed somewhere. At the same time, fate had already intervened. Queen Helen was unaware that, just a few blocks away, a heart like hers was being held captive in chains of suffering. It was the heart of Grace, who had just finished cleaning the front yard and was preparing to face new insults from her stepmother's family. Destiny was drawing the disguised queen and the enslaved girl closer together. While Queen Helen was experiencing the bitterness of the world through the guise of poverty, not far away, in a small, dilapidated house with cracked walls and a rusty gate, Grace was living her own hell on earth. Her life was a long series of oppression, where love had been completely replaced by cruelty and exploitation. Grace didn't need an alarm clock. Her stepmother, Rose's shrill voice was louder than any alarm. "Grace, are you still asleep? Do you want me to pour cold water on you?" She awoke with a start from the flimsy mattress on the cramped warehouse floor, the place where she had been moved after her father's death. Her body ached, her eyes heavy with lack of sleep, but she had to act quickly. She hastily wrapped an old towel around her hair and rushed out into the living room. Rose was already seated on the sofa, legs crossed, scrolling through her phone. Grace's two stepsisters were still fast asleep in their comfortable room inside. "Good morning, Ma," Grace greeted softly. Mrs. Rose did not return the greeting. She simply pointed to a long list on the table. "Sweep the yard, wash the dishes, fetch water, do my laundry, iron the uniforms of the two younger siblings, and don't let me see you resting." "Yes, Ma," Grace replied softly, picking up the broom and going out into the yard. The yard was uneven, dusty, and littered with fallen leaves and scraps of paper. She began sweeping, slowly gathering the dirt into small piles. Her hands worked, but her mind drifted far away. Sometimes, she remembered her late father, who used to call her "my little sunshine." Her father remarried Rose after her mother's death, hoping to give her a complete family. But after his sudden death, everything changed dramatically. Rose took over the house, locked Grace in her room, and confined her to a small shed. She sold off most of her father's possessions and told the neighbors that Grace was just a relative staying there temporarily. In her own home, Grace became an unpaid servant. While sweeping the yard, she heard loud laughter coming from inside. Her two stepsisters woke up and came out dressed in neat clothes, phones in hand. "Hurry up, Grace," one of the girls shouted. "You'll make us late for school." The other girl wrinkled her nose. "Look at you, drenched in sweat. You look just like a real slave." They giggled and walked past her without offering any help. Grace continued sweeping, trying to hold back tears. She was used to these harsh words, but they still hurt her. She longed to go to school, to read, to be treated like a human being, not like trash. However, she still maintained her kindness. "Your uniforms have been ironed and are on your beds," she said gently. "I'll prepare your lunch now." They didn't even bother to say thank you. After a while, Grace finished sweeping and pushed the small pile of trash to the narrow corner outside the gate, where the local garbage collectors usually passed by. She bent down, carefully tying the plastic bag tightly so the trash wouldn't spill onto the street. Her fingers were covered in dust. Her back ached, but she still worked meticulously, not wanting to see any dirt scattered around. As she stood up straight, she suddenly saw an old woman walking slowly down the street, carrying a bag full of recyclable trash and a long walking stick. The old woman's clothes were faded, her scarf worn, and she looked very tired, but her eyes shone with gentleness. And then, Grace witnessed the very scene that Queen Helen had witnessed, the thoughtless children throwing banana peels onto the street, right in front of the old woman, the insensitive adults laughing at her. A deep sense of empathy welled up in Grace's heart. She saw the old woman's quiet dignity, even as she was buried in the garbage, and the way others looked at her as if she didn't exist. Without much thought, Grace took the garbage bag she had just tied and carried it to the old woman. "Good morning, Ma," Grace said softly. "Please, I've left the trash here so it's easier for you to retrieve. Let me help you tie it up securely." The old woman, Queen Helen, looked up, surprised by the gentle voice. For the first time, the queen and the slave girl stood face to face. The queen, dressed as a scavenger, had not been treated with such respect all morning. All she had heard was shouting, mockery, or indifference. But this girl, thin, weary, with dirt on her clothes and sadness in her eyes, spoke to her politely. "Good morning, Ma," Grace repeated, carefully holding the plastic bag. "Let me help you." Queen Helen's heart was unusually warm. She smiled gently. "Good morning, my daughter. Thank you." Grace bent slightly as she tied the bag, making sure it wouldn't tear. "I'm sorry they made a mess on the street," she said. "I know the work is hard." The queen observed Grace closely. The girl was not at all pretentious. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. No prince, no cameras, just an old woman and a dirty garbage bag. "What is your name?" Queen Helen asked softly. "My name is Grace, Ma," the girl replied. In that moment, the queen knew she had found a rare and compassionate heart, a heart that knew how to shine, even when suppressed beneath the dust of life. After finishing her sweeping and disposing of the last pile of trash at the corner of the gate, Grace stood up straight, her back aching, but her eyes still searched for something indistinct on the dusty street. She had only just turned away when she saw the old woman, the garbage collector she had witnessed being humiliated earlier, slowly approaching. The old woman carried a full plastic bag and an old walking stick, walking with a weary but determined air. Grace witnessed a scene that Queen Helen had also witnessed, the thoughtless of passers-by, throwing banana peels onto the road right in front of an old woman. A man nearby laughed loudly, mocking her with vulgar language. A deep sense of empathy and compassion welled up in Grace's heart. She saw the quiet dignity of the old woman, the way she bent down to pick up the banana peel without complaint or anger. That humble act touched Grace's heart, a heart that too was enduring daily humiliation. Without giving any thought to the consequences or Mrs. Rose's possible anger, Grace decided she had to act. She picked up the garbage bag she had carefully tied up and took it to the old woman. "Good morning, Ma," Grace said softly, her voice gentle and respectful. "I've left the trash here so it's easier for you to retrieve. Let me help you tie it up securely." The old woman, Queen Helen, looked up. Her eyes were filled with surprise and emotion. All morning she had received only contempt, shouts, or indifference. Grace was the only one who had treated her with genuine kindness and politeness. "Good morning, Ma," Grace repeated, slightly bending her knees and beginning to tie the plastic bag shut. "I'm sorry they made a mess on the street. I know your job is hard." Queen Helen felt a warmth in her heart. This girl, oppressed and suffering, could show concern for a stranger whom everyone called rubbish. She observed carefully. Grace wasn't faking it. There was no one she needed to impress. Only a poor old woman. She knew this was the pure heart her husband had longed for. "What is your name?" Queen Helen asked softly. "My name is Grace Ma," the girl replied. The old woman, dressed as a scavenger, shook her head slightly, saying she traveled from place to place to make a living. Grace's eyes lit up with pity. "I'm sorry, Ma. Life is tough." Queen Helen, wanting to understand Grace's situation better, pointed to the house and said, "And you live in that house." Grace's throat tightened. She hesitated. The truth about Mrs. Rose was a burden. Finally, she whispered, She's my stepmother." The Queen asked no further questions, but she could read the pain in the girl's eyes. The conversation, which had been going on peacefully, was abruptly interrupted by an angry shout from inside. "Grace, what are you doing there? Are you done with that pile of filthy garbage yet?" Mrs. Rose rushed out the gate, her face contorted with anger. When she saw Grace talking to and helping the garbage collector, she nearly exploded. "What the hell are you doing, Grace? Are you making friends with filthy people now?" Mrs. Rose turned to the Queen, a contemptuous sneer on her lips. "Old woman, get out and take your things. You're making this place stink." Grace lowered her head and mumbled, "I just... Get out of here," Rose shrieked. She glared at the Queen. "Don't stand in front of my house. This girl is already lazy, and you're here to distract her." Grace hastily whispered an apology to the old woman, and then rushed inside. Her shoulders slumped with fear. Queen Helen stood there, witnessing it all. She had seen many proud people, but Lady Rose's voice was particularly cold and cruel. It held no love, only control. As Mrs. Rose turned to go back inside, Queen Helen quietly departed. She had seen enough. Grace's small, simple act, helping to tie up the rubbish bag, speaking kindly, despite the fear of punishment, was the answer. The pure heart she had been searching for had been confirmed. She decided she had to return. She needed to test this kindness under greater pressure, to see if Grace dared to sacrifice her personal interests to help someone who was insignificant in the eyes of others. Grace's compassion was not a coincidence, but the foundation upon which the Queen wished to ascend the throne. Queen Helen returned to the palace that afternoon, her body weary but her mind remarkably clear. She had seen the greed and indifference of the world through the eyes of a scavenger, and more importantly, she had found a rare ray of light named Grace. However, she needed absolute certainty. An act of kindness might be accidental, but a compassionate sacrifice under pressure was the hallmark of a queen. After a few days of quietly preparing and planning, the Queen donned her tattered, old clothes again. She left through the back gate, her heart ready for the final challenge. It was a scorching afternoon. Queen Helen walked slower than usual down the street leading to Grace's house. When she reached the gate, she began to act. She feigned intense dizziness, her steps faltering, her legs trembled. She dropped her plastic bag to the ground and leaned against the rusty gate, breathing heavily. In the yard, Grace was diligently doing laundry. She heard a small noise outside and hurried to the gate. She saw the old woman picking up trash, kneeling, her head bowed, breathing heavily. "Ghost!" Grace shrieked, forgetting her fear of Mrs. Rose. "Are you all right?" Queen Helen moaned softly, expressing her discomfort. "My head, my breasts... Without hesitation, without a second thought, Grace immediately dropped the laundry brush and ran to the old woman's side. She put an arm around the old woman's back, trying to help her sit up properly. "Please, come inside and rest," Grace pleaded. "It's too hot. You can't sit out here." Queen Helen's heart was nearly broken. Grace knew how angry Mrs. Rose would be, but she was still willing to let the garbage collector into the courtyard to rest. That was the sacrifice the Queen wanted to see. However, before they could move, Mrs. Rose reappeared. She stormed out into the yard upon hearing the commotion and flew into a rage when she saw Grace embracing the old woman picking up trash. "What's going on here?" Mrs. Rose roared. "Grace, are you out of your mind? I warned you." Grace swallowed hard, her voice trembling with fear, but she still managed to explain. "Ghost, she's not feeling well. Please, let her sit down and rest for a while." Mrs. Rose's cruelty reached its peak. She violently slapped the washcloth out of Grace's hand. "Are you stupid? This is my home, not a refugee camp. Let her go die where she came from." Her words were as sharp as daggers. Queen Helen felt tears welling up in her eyes, not for herself, but for Grace. Grace turned to her stepmother, her voice trembling with pleading. "Ma, please... Just 10 minutes. She can sit in the corner of the yard." I promise I'll finish everything." Mrs. Rose approached Grace, her eyes blazing with malice. "If that filthy woman steps through this gate," she hissed, "you won't get anything to eat today. I'll even throw your mattress out and make you sleep in the trash can with her." Grace froze. Fear gripped her like shackles. She looked at the old woman's weary face, then at the house behind her, her only refuge. In the end, the fear of losing her shelter prevailed. She slowly helped the Queen sit leaning against the wall outside the gate, in a small patch of shade. "I'm sorry, Ma," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "She won't let you in, but I'll bring you some water." Grace hurried into the house, filled a glass with clean water, and brought it back to the old woman. Her hands trembled as she offered the glass. "Please drink," Grace said. "I'm so sorry. I wish I could have done more." Queen Helen accepted the cup of water, her heart overflowing with emotion. This moment revealed everything. An oppressed girl threatened with losing her home, yet choosing kindness and self-sacrifice to help a stranger. She saw the whole picture. This was the heart she had been searching for all along. As Grace returned to her laundry, wiping away tears with the back of her hand, Queen Helen watched her and made a silent promise. "I will not leave you in this house. Even if I have to fight for my crown, I will get you out of here." That evening, Queen Helen returned to the palace. Her body was weary, but her heart was remarkably clear. She cast off her old clothes, washed the dirt from her hands, and put on her royal robes. As she placed the crown on her head, she looked in the mirror. The woman who had just been insulted in the street was now powerful and respected. But her heart remembered vividly the image of the girl kneeling by the gate, trembling as she offered her water. During dinner, Prince Daniel noticed his mother's calm but serious demeanor. "Mother," he asked softly, "are you deep in thought?" She smiled softly. "There's always something on a mother's mind, son, but this time it's about you." Daniel put down his fork. "I'm listening." Queen Helen looked at her son cautiously. "If you met a girl who had nothing," she asked slowly, "no fine clothes, no wealthy family, no title, but a pure and kind heart, would you be willing to marry such a person?" Daniel's answer was simple and firm. "Yes, mother. That's the wife I've been praying for." The Queen's heart was completely comforted. She nodded. "Then, Mother believes that God has begun to answer our prayers." Grace stepped into the large, elegant living room. The floor was a gleaming marble slab, and the walls were adorned with expensive oil paintings she had never seen before, except in books, if she had ever had the chance to read them. Everything was too dazzling, too magnificent for a girl who had just emerged from the grime and oppression of the world. And then, her gaze settled on the center of the room. Queen Helen sat in a luxurious armchair. She wore an elegant yet simple robe, and her tiara rested gently on her head. Grace recognized her instantly, not by her royal attire, but by her eyes. Those were the same gentle eyes she had seen beneath the guise of a poor garbage collector. Grace froze in shock. She had never been so close to a member of the royal family. The greatness and power emanating from the Queen caused her knees to buckle. She immediately fell to her knees. "Good afternoon, my Queen," she whispered, her voice trembling with fear and astonishment. Queen Helen smiled gently, her voice as soft as when she had received the glass of water at Grace's gate, only now it was clearer and more authoritative. "Get up, my daughter," she said. "What is your name?" Grace slowly rose to her feet, her head still bowed. "I am Grace, your Majesty." The Queen looked at her intently. She saw weariness in her eyes, humility in her posture, and scars etched on her hands from overwork. "How old are you, Grace?" she asked. "I am 25 years old, your Majesty. Have you ever worked at anyone else's house before?" Grace swallowed. "No, your Majesty. I've only worked in my stepmother's house." The Queen's gaze softened. "Sit down," she said, gesturing to a small chair. Grace hesitated. "Your Majesty, I cannot... Sit down," the Queen repeated, still gently but authoritatively. "You are safe here." Slowly, Grace sat down on the edge of the chair, her fingers intertwining on the edge of her old scarf. Queen Helen leaned forward slightly. "I hear you are a hard worker," she said. "I also know that life hasn't been fair to you." Grace's eyes welled up with tears, though she tried to hold them back. I only tried my best, your Majesty," she whispered. The Queen nodded. "In this house," she said slowly, "you will work, yes, but you will also have rest. You will be well fed, you will have your own room." She paused, looking Grace straight in the eyes, "and you will be treated like a human being." Those words touched Grace's heart like a warm light. Her lips trembled. "Thank you, your Majesty," she managed to say. Just then, a door in the distance opened. Soft footsteps approached. A tall, composed young man entered the room, dressed in a simple shirt and trousers. His presence exuded a gentle yet powerful aura. "Good afternoon, Mother," said Prince Daniel. His eyes rested on Grace. She immediately lowered her head, not daring to look him in the eye. "Daniel," Queen Helen said with a gentle smile, "this is Grace. She will be staying with us from today." Prince Daniel silently observed the girl. He noticed the way she bowed her head, her shoulders slightly slumped, as if she were accustomed to being scolded. But he also noticed the quiet strength in the way she held back her tears. "Welcome, Grace," he said kindly. "She's safe here." Those simple words made Grace lift her head for a moment. Their eyes met for a brief instant. Not love at first sight, but a small, quiet recognition. "Thank you, Prince," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. Queen Helen watched them, her heart at peace. She spoke of marriage not yet. She wanted their hearts to see each other, slowly and naturally, as true feelings develop. "Grace," said the Queen, "follow the maid. She will show you your room and the kitchen. Rest a little. Your new life begins today." Grace rose and bowed. "Thank you, Your Majesty," she repeated, tears now streaming down her face uncontrollably. As she followed her maid Mary out of the room, Prince Daniel turned to his mother. "There's something different about her, Mother," he said softly. Queen Helen smiled, her eyes sparkling with quiet joy. "Yes," she replied, "there is indeed something different." Days passed, and the palace gradually became a home for Grace. At first, she moved like a shadow, afraid to touch anything, afraid to make mistakes. She woke up early, helped in the kitchen, cleaned, and served with utmost care. But unlike her stepmother's house, no one here yelled at her for minor mistakes. If she accidentally dropped a spoon, Mary would smile gently and say, "Calm down, Grace. It's nothing unusual." If she looked tired, the cook would secretly give her an extra piece of bread and tell her to sit down and rest for a few minutes. Slowly, the fear inside her began to melt away. Prince Daniel frequently walked through the service area, greeting everyone with respect. He treated everyone equally, from the chefs to the cleaners. Whenever he saw Grace, he would smile and ask, "How are you today?" At first, she only nodded. But one day, she mustered up the courage to reply, "I am well, Your Highness, thank you." He noticed her face brightened when she talked about simple things, like the smell of morning bread or the sound of rain in the evening. He noticed she was grateful for the smallest things, even a kind word. One afternoon, Queen Helen summoned Grace to the garden. The air was cool, and birds hopped on the grass. The Queen sat on a stone bench, without her crown. "Sit down with me," she said. Grace sat down on the edge of the chair, confused. "Your Majesty, have I done something wrong?" she asked cautiously. The Queen shook her head. "No, my daughter. You have done everything right." She looked at Grace for a long time, then slowly said, "I want to tell you something, but first, answer me honestly. Are you happy here?" Grace's eyes welled up with tears. "Yes, Your Majesty," she choked out. "This is the first place in my life where I haven't been treated like a curse." The Queen's heart sank. "Did my stepmother call me a curse?" Grace bowed her head. "Many times. She said I bring bad luck." Queen Helen reached out and gently took Grace's hand. "Listen to me," she said firmly. "You are not a curse. You are a blessing that God has hidden in a bad place." Grace's tears flowed freely. She sobbed uncontrollably. The Queen waited until she calmed down, then took a deep breath. "Grace," she began, "do you remember the old woman picking up trash that you helped at your gate?" Grace was stunned. Her heart pounded. "Yes, Your Majesty. She was very kind. I often think about her." Queen Helen smiled gently. "Then, look at me carefully." Grace looked up in confusion. The Queen's face, without heavy makeup, had the same features, the same eyes, the same gentle smile as the old woman she had seen on the street. Everything came crashing down at once. "Your Majesty," Grace whispered, horrified. You are her." Grace stood motionless in the royal gardens, her whole body trembling. Her simple clothes, her worn scarf, and the invisible dust of years of oppression seemed to have been swept away by this shockwave. She stared at Queen Helen, who sat serenely on a stone bench. The tenderness in her eyes, no different from that of the woman who had knelt in the scorching sun just weeks before. "Your Majesty," Grace whispered, falling to her knees on the grass, tears streaming down her face. I didn't know. Please forgive me. Double quotes. The Queen gently placed her hand on her shoulder. "Stand up, my daughter. she said. "You have done nothing wrong. You did not treat me well because you knew I was the queen. You treated me well because your heart is pure." She patiently waited for Grace to stand up, still trembling. "I came to that street in the guise of poverty, because I wanted to see the truth, untarnished by the throne. I saw your stepmother's pride and cruelty, and I saw you even when threatened with losing your only refuge. You chose compassion." Grace was speechless. She could only weep, tears of happiness, relief, and gratitude that had accumulated over the years of hardship. She understood that her small, simple act at the gate had been the final test, a test she had passed with her inherent goodness, and that, the queen said, her voice filled with emotion, is why you are here. "I have been searching for a wife for my son, not a girl who loves titles, but one who loves people. And Grace, you are the one I have been praying for." Just then, Prince Daniel entered the garden. He stopped when he saw Grace's tear-streaked face and his mother's solemn expression. "Mom," he asked, "what's wrong?" Queen Helen smiled, a radiant, contented smile that Daniel rarely saw. "Daniel," she said, "this is Grace, the girl who showed true compassion when the whole world saw only rubbish. I brought her here not just to work, but because I believe she deserves to stand by your side." Prince Daniel looked at Grace. He saw humility, honesty, and the pain that hadn't diminished her inner beauty. He trusted his mother. "Grace," Daniel said, stepping closer, his voice gentle, "I don't know the full story, but I see your heart, and I believe in my mother's choice." Grace, though still confused, looked up. She saw in his eyes an unproven kindness, a respect that needed no title. Queen Helen took both their hands. "I am not forcing you. Love must blossom naturally. But I want you to know, Grace, in this palace, you are not just a servant. You are the answer to my prayers." In the days that followed, the feelings between Grace and Prince Daniel developed slowly and naturally. They talked about simple things, about the book Grace longed to read, about the gardens Daniel loved to stroll in. Daniel loved Grace's unwavering humility and profound gratitude. Grace loved the genuine kindness Daniel showed to everyone, a quality she had never seen in the wealthy. Finally, without any arrangement, Daniel proposed, and Queen Helen announced the wedding date. The big day arrived. Drums echoed throughout Ravona. The palace was lavishly decorated with flowers and silk. Grace sat before the mirror, barely recognizing herself. Her hair was neatly styled in an updo, adorned with strings of sparkling pearls. Her pristine white wedding dress, trimmed in gold, was magnificent but not ostentatious, perfectly suited to her modest appearance. "You are so beautiful," whispered the maid Mary. Grace looked in the mirror, tears welling up again. "Is this really me?" She couldn't see the scars on her hands, but her heart remembered the years of sweeping floors in tears, the promise of kindness to an old garbage collector, and the curse of her stepmother. Queen Helen entered, her eyes sparkling. "My daughter," she whispered, "you look like an answer to prayer." The ceremony began. In the great hall, the elders and distinguished guests gathered. Daniel stood waiting, his heart pounding. Grace entered, her eyes fixed on him. Each step took her away from her former life of slavery. Each step, a silent affirmation. "I have survived. I have not fallen." After the couple exchanged vows, the coronation ceremony began. Daniel knelt down and was crowned king. The entire hall erupted in cheers. Then it was Grace's turn. Queen Helen herself held the queen's crown. Her voice, now, was not just that of her mother, but the voice of royal authority. "You were once called nothing," she whispered, so only Grace and Daniel could hear. "Now, I place this crown upon your head as my daughter and as the queen of this land." The crown was gently placed on Grace's head. The elder declared, "This is Grace, the wife of our king, the queen of this land." Far away in their dilapidated house, Mrs. Rose and her two daughters were watching the ceremony on their neighbor's old television. They watched with curiosity, wanting to see who would be the lucky one to marry the prince. And then, the camera panned straight to the face of the new queen. The piece of cake in Clara's hand fell to the ground. Bella dropped her glass of water. Mrs. Rose's mouth dropped open, her eyes wide with shock. That's Grace," she stammered, her voice devoid of any authority. "No way," Clara shrieked. "She's just our maid." But that was Grace, the girl they called a slave, the girl they drove away without a single bag of clothes, now smiling beside the king, crowned with power. Jealousy burned fiercely in Mrs. Rose. "She tricked us," she cried. She must have planned it all. But her voice trembled with fear, and a deep sense of regret crept in. Greed had made them sell their very ticket to a better life. In the great hall, the sound of drums and cheers echoed. Daniel leaned towards his wife. "Are you all right?" Grace nodded, her eyes sparkling with happiness. "Yes," she said. "I'm better than ever." Queen Helen stood behind them, her heart finally at rest. She had kept her promise to her late husband. She had found a wife with a pure heart. A queen once disguised herself as a scavenger. A slave girl offered water to her. Now, both stand under the same light. King, queen, and queen mother, a story of destiny that refused to bow to a bitter past.